So, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this morning's Sutta study. We will start with the Namo Tassa. Feel free to join in if you like. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Bodhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. So, welcome everyone. Today we are doing the fourth session of our four-part series about the chief lay disciples. So we have already done the two female ones, Nandamata and Kuchuttara, and we have also done one of the male ones, Chitta the householder. And today we are doing the last one, which is Hatthaka of Āḷavī. And Hatthaka of Āḷavī wasn't only one of the chief lay disciples, he was also one of the foremost disciples. So he is found in a list in the Anguttara Nikaya, where he is foremost for a very unusual quality, which is that he was foremost among those who make use of the four means of attracting and sustaining others. So that means he had a very large following, and he did that by following a teaching of the Buddha about four means to attract other people. And that will be explained more in one of the suttas that we are reading today. So I'm not going into detail now, even though this seems a little bit weird maybe. And Hatthaka of Āḷavī, he came from a Buddhist family. He was a prince. He was the son of the king in Āḷavī. And he also had a sister, Sela Ālavika, or Sela of Āḷavī, who was an outstanding bhikkhuni. She was an arahant bhikkhuni, and I have spoken about her in detail, in a lot of detail, in another recording. So if you're interested, you can check that out later. But she has verses in the Therigatha, and she also has verses in the Samyutta Nikaya, and also in the Chinese parallels. And she was a very amazing bhikkhuni. And she also had a very special kind of ordination. She was ordained by the Buddha himself personally. And in the Samyutta Nikaya and in the Therigatha, she has an encounter with Mara. And of course, because she's an arahant bhikkhuni, she defeats him. So if you're interested, you can check that out. In the Therigatha, you will find her under the name Sela, and in the Samyutta Nikaya, you will find her under the name Ālavika, since she is the princess from Āḷavī. But today we want to talk about Hatthaka, her brother. And as we have seen previously in our series, for the women disciples, we have very few suttas. For Kuchuttara, we didn't have any sutta at all. For Nandamata, we had one sutta where she appears and one sutta where the Buddha talks about her. But for the men, we have a little bit more material. For Chitta the householder, we had an entire Samyutta in the Samyutta Nikaya, so we had a lot of material to study. And today with Hatthaka, we also have a few suttas about him. And all his suttas are in the Anguttara Nikaya, and we have 3 suttas where he appears, where he is the main character, and 1 sutta where the Buddha talks about him. And because his suttas are fairly short, I think we can read all 3 of them today and briefly skim through the one where the Buddha talks about him. So that is our plan for this morning. And we will start with the first sutta, which is Anguttara Nikaya 3.35. And this is a very quirky little sutta, very unusual. So feel free to read along if you want. The links to the suttas are all in the description box. And I will be reading from Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation. So this sutta 3.35 in the Anguttara Nikaya is called Hatthaka. And it goes as follows. On one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling at Āḷavī, on a heap of leaves spread out on a cow track in a Simsapa grove. Then Hatthaka of Āḷavī, while walking and wandering for exercise, saw the Blessed One sitting there. He then approached the Blessed One, paid homage to him, sat down to one side, and said to the Blessed One, "Bhante, did the Blessed One sleep well?" So here we have the Buddha, and the Buddha is living outdoors. He is just living on a spread of leaves in the middle of a forest on a cow track. So pretty austere conditions. And Hatthaka, the prince, is walking around. And since he is a Buddhist follower, he sees the Buddha and, of course, goes up to him and has a conversation with him. And when a sutta starts like this, I always think that's really, really beautiful. And I wish that we would live at a time where we can just go for a walk outdoors and then chance upon the Buddha and get a Dhamma talk. So I always think that this is really, really beautiful if you have the opportunity to just bump into the Buddha while you're walking around. And he asked the Buddha if he sees that the Buddha is living in these very austere conditions, and then he asks if the Buddha actually is comfortable, if he can sleep well when he's staying there. And the Buddha says, "Yes, Prince, I slept well. I am one of those in the world who sleep well." And Hatthaka says, "But Bhante, the winter nights are cold. It is the 8-day interval, the time when snow falls. The ground trampled by the hooves of cattle is rough. The spread of leaves is thin. The leaves on the tree are sparse. The ochre robes leave one cold, and the gale wind blows cold. Yet the Blessed One says thus, 'Yes, Prince, I slept well. I'm one of those in the world who sleep well.'" So here we get a little bit more detail about the conditions that the Buddha is living in, and it is the middle of winter. And often we perceive India to be very warm. It's a subtropical country. We think it's always a very comfortable climate, but actually it does get very cold in winter. And here especially they're talking about the 8-day interval. This is something that's mentioned from time to time in the suttas and the Vinaya. This means it is the coldest time of the year. And it's a time that corresponds to roughly our February, the early or middle of February. And yeah, we have the description here. Snow is falling, the nights are cold, there are strong winds, there are almost no trees, no leaves on the trees, so there's no shelter for the Buddha. And of course, the ground is frozen and rough where the Buddha is staying. And also, it seems that the Buddha doesn't have a blanket. Hatthaka says that Hatthaka is only talking about his robes. It seems that he is wearing just the robes. So maybe the Buddha here is doing a Dhutanga practice, only wearing 3 robes, the triple robe wearers practice. And maybe the Buddha doesn't even have a blanket while he's staying out there. So it seems that the Buddha is living in very austere conditions here. And I think that's very interesting also. I like these quirky little suttas because we can often have the impression that the Buddha lived in fairly comfortable conditions. We have all the descriptions of his kutis and how there's all these fairly elaborate equipment that he has there. And he has all these supporters that are rich. So it can seem that some of the monks and nuns were practicing very austerely, but the Buddha himself didn't really do that. But sometimes in the suttas that we have here, we see that the Buddha actually also did from time to time practice in these very austere conditions. And so Hatthaka, obviously being a prince, he's not used to such conditions, and he's worried about the Buddha and is asking if the Buddha can manage and if he can sleep well there. And then the Buddha replies, "Well then, Prince, I will question you about this matter. You should answer as you see fit. What do you think, Prince? A householder or a householder's son might have a house with a peaked roof, plastered inside and out, draft-free with bolts fastened and shutters closed." There he might have a couch spread with rugs, blankets, and covers, with an excellent covering of antelope hide, with a canopy above and red bolsters at both ends. An oil lamp would be burning, and his 4 wives would serve him in extremely agreeable ways. What do you think? Would he sleep well or not? Or what do you think about this? He would sleep well, Bhante. He would be one of those in the world who sleep well. So here now the Buddha is painting a picture of the exact opposite of his own living conditions. Basically, the description that we see here is what is considered the peak of luxury back then. So a very fancy house with a peaked roof, very well plastered so that the wind doesn't come through. And then they have all the luxury furniture with red cushions at both ends of the bed. So this is how they imagined very luxurious living, and probably how Hatthaka as a prince was living himself. And then Hatthaka thinks that if you have these kind of conditions, then you should be sleeping well. And then the Buddha continues, what do you think, prince? Might there arise in that householder or householder's son bodily and mental fevers, born of lust, born of hatred, or born of delusion, which would torment him so that he would sleep badly? Yes, Bhante. There might arise in that householder or householder's son bodily and mental fevers, born of lust, which would torment, born of lust, born of hatred, born of delusion, which would torment him so that he would sleep badly. But the Tathagata has abandoned such lust, such hatred, such delusion, cut it off at the root, made it like a palm stump, obliterated it so that it is no more subject to future arising. Therefore, I have slept well. So here the Buddha is teaching Hatthaka the secret to good sleep. And obviously it doesn't necessarily depend on your external conditions. If you have mental turmoil, if you're internally agitated because of the defilements, if you're subject to greed, hatred, and delusion, then this is what will keep you awake at night. But if you have abandoned all the defilements, if you are an arahant, then there's nothing in your mind that would disturb you. So your mind is always calm, and for that reason, you can always sleep well, you can always rest, you can always be at peace. Both when you sleep and when you don't sleep, you will also be at peace. So this is the secret to good sleep. Also for everybody at home who might have trouble sleeping, try to meditate before you go to bed, try to have a calm, peaceful lifestyle. And the Buddha adds 2 stanzas at the end, and he says, he always sleeps well, the Brahmin who has attained Nibbana, cooled off without acquisitions, not tainted by sensual pleasures. Having cut off all attachments, having removed anguish in the heart, the peaceful one sleeps well, having attained peace of mind. So this is the first sutta about Hatthaka. And now we will move on to another one. The second one is actually the main sutta that deals with Hatthaka, the main teaching. And this also explains to us how Hatthaka got this foremost quality of having this large following. And this sutta is also in the Anguttara Nikaya. This is Anguttara Nikaya number 8.24. And it is also called Hatthaka. And this sutta goes as follows. On one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling at Āḷavī, at the Āgalava shrine. Then Hatthaka of Āḷavī, accompanied by 500 lay followers, approached the Blessed One, paid homage to him, and sat down to one side. The Blessed One then said to him, your retinue is large, Hatthaka. How do you sustain this large retinue? So here we see Hatthaka is coming with a very, very large group of people. And so this is now why they talk about the foremost quality of Hatthaka, of having such a large group. And Hatthaka explains, I do so, Bhante, by the 4 means of sustaining a favorable relationship taught by the Blessed One. So Hatthaka says, the Buddha taught him previously how to establish a good relationship with others. And because he's putting that teaching into practice, he was able to generate such a large group or such a large following. And I think this is, again, interesting because obviously the Buddha's teaching of the 4 means of sustaining a favorable relationship, this is a very obscure teaching. I am assuming that many people who are listening in have never heard of this teaching. But it is actually found in the Anguttara Nikaya in 2 different suttas. But in order to know this teaching, you have to have a fairly good acquaintance with the Buddha's teaching. This is not something that you easily come across. You have to really have a fairly in-depth knowledge of the Nikayas to come across this teaching. So this is something, again, that shows us about the chief disciples, how deeply learned they were in the Dhamma. So for Hatthaka here, we just infer this because you know this teaching, but in the next sutta that we read, we will see that shown more clearly how deep his knowledge was in the Dhamma. But we have seen that very, very clearly for the other 3 chief disciples that we have looked at. For Kuch Uttara, for example, we have seen that she memorized the entire Itivuttaka collection. For Nanda Mata, we have seen that she memorized also a lot, for example, entire chapters in the Sutta Nipata. And for Chitta, the householder, obviously, he memorized discourses from the Digha Nikaya, from the Majjhima Nikaya that are very, very long. And he also had memorized several texts from the Sutta Nipata. So we also saw that he was very, very well acquainted with the Buddha's teaching in a lot of detail. And so this is one feature that we see for the chief lay disciples, how deeply they were interested in the Dhamma and how much learning they had in the Dhamma. So this is something that was very important, not only for the monastics, but also for the lay people, to have this deep and very broad knowledge of Dhamma. And for Hatthaka, he also had this kind of knowledge, and he even knows this really fairly obscure teachings here. And he not only knows them, he's also putting them into practice, and they work for him. He was able to attract this large following. And now he explains those 4 means of sustaining a favorable relationship. And he says, when I know this one is to be sustained by a gift, I sustain him by a gift. When I know this one is to be sustained by endearing speech, I sustain him by endearing speech. When I know this one is to be sustained by beneficent conduct, I sustain him by beneficent conduct. When I know this one is to be sustained by impartiality, I sustain him by impartiality. And there is wealth in my family, Bhante. They don't think they should listen to me as if I were poor. So Hatthaka here now lists those 4 means of sustaining a favorable relationship. The first one is giving a gift to somebody. So if you give a gift to somebody, they will have obviously that will be helpful to establish a positive relationship with them. And so in that way, you can make a friend. And the second means is what is called here endearing speech. So speaking in a gentle, in a friendly way to somebody, obviously that will also help to have a good relationship with that person. Then the third one is what is called here beneficent conduct. So if you generally are friendly towards people, if you treat them well, then again, that is a means to establish a good relationship with people. And the fourth one is impartiality. So if you don't play favorites with people, if you treat everybody equally, and people can rely on you and know that you're not going to prefer one over the other and you won't discriminate against somebody, then again, that is obviously something that will establish a good relationship between people. So these are the 4 means: giving gifts, speaking in friendly ways, treating people well and not discriminating against people. These 4 means are what the Buddha taught in order to establish a good relationship with people and to attract a large following. And Hatthaka put this into practice, and he became the foremost of people who practice in this way. But then Hatthaka adds another thing, and he says, well, my family is wealthy, so people listen to me because my family is wealthy and they think that I'm worth listening to. They think that I'm worth paying attention to. So this is something that I think many people can relate to. This is obviously something that we see in our daily life. If people have money, if people have influence, then they are listened to much more. than somebody who is poor and who doesn't have influence. So wealthy people obviously can attract a much larger following than people who with a lot less money and a lot less influence. So Hatthaka, being a prince, obviously has money, and he is self-aware enough to know that this also influences people and that this is a reason why people also want to follow him. Anyway, the Buddha now comes back to the 4 means of sustaining a favorable relationship, and he says, good Hatthaka. This is the method by which you can sustain a large retinue. For all those in the past who sustained a large retinue did so by these same 4 means of sustaining a favorable relationship. All those in the future who will sustain a large retinue will do so by these same 4 means of sustaining a favorable relationship. And all those at present who sustain a large retinue do so by these same 4 means of sustaining a favorable relationship. Then after the Blessed One had instructed, encouraged, inspired, and gladdened Hatthaka of Āḻavī with the Dhamma talk, Hatthaka rose from his seat, paid homage to the Blessed One, circumambulated him, keeping the right side towards him, and departed. Then not long after Hatthaka of Āḻavī had left, the Blessed One addressed the bhikkhus. Bhikkhus, you should remember Hatthaka of Āḻavī as one who possesses 8 astounding and amazing qualities. So now here the Buddha is teaching the bhikkhus about the good qualities that Hatthaka had. And this, of course, reminds us of the sutta with Nandamata, where Nandamata also had a long list of astounding and amazing qualities that she was telling about. And this is obviously very important because, as we know, the Buddha taught that as lay people or as monastics, we should emulate the chief followers among the monastics, and as lay people, we should emulate and follow and imitate the chief supporters among the lay people. So it's very important to know what their character was like, what kind of qualities they had. So now here there are 8 qualities that we should emulate, that we should try to develop, so we can check ourselves, do we have those qualities? And if we are lacking a little bit, then we have a list of things where we can work on and that we can try to develop and improve. And so those 8 qualities are as follows. What 8? He is endowed with faith. So Hatthaka obviously has faith in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. Number 2, he is virtuous. So he is keeping precepts, he is keeping sila, also very important. And then number 3 and 4, he has a sense of moral shame and moral dread. So in Pali, this is called hiri and ottappa. And this is a quality, or these are 2 qualities that are sometimes difficult for people to understand, and people can have very strong reactions, especially to the word shame. And sometimes it's difficult to understand how that can be a positive quality, because we often associate that with negative qualities or with negative mind states. And basically what these 2 qualities are about is that if we are in a situation where we could do something unwholesome, then there is something, a mental quality in us that restrains us, that holds us back from doing something unwholesome. And that can either be because we think, well, if I do this unwholesome thing, what will other people, what will good people like my friends or Dhamma practitioners think about me? So because we are afraid of losing face in front of others, or because we are afraid of what other people might think of us if we do something unwholesome, and that they would lose confidence in us, that's what restrains us. So this is ottappa. Or we might think, well, if I do this unwholesome thing, then I myself will feel very uncomfortable. I will not be happy with myself. So I will reproach myself. And because I would think that I have done something wrong, or I would lose my own sense of self-worth, that restrains me, then this is hiri. So either because oneself, we would not feel comfortable in our skin if we did this, or because we think other people would look down on us if we did this. That is what restrains us from unwholesome conduct. So in that sense, we can understand why these are positive qualities, because they restrain us from doing unwholesome things. So this is Hiri and Uttapa, and Hatthaka has both of those qualities. And then number 5, he is learned. So here it comes up again that a chief disciple, an outstanding disciple of the Buddha, should be very learned in the Dhamma. He is generous. So again, generosity, obviously giving and sharing things with others is a very, very important quality. And he is wise. This is number 7, he's wise. So of course, as a chief disciple, this is one of the main qualities that are important on the Buddhist path. And number 8, he has few desires. You should remember Hatthaka of Āḻavī as one who possesses these 8 astounding and amazing qualities. So this 8th quality, that he has few desires, there's a little backstory of how he got this 8th quality. And this is a sutta that we're not going to read, but we're going to very briefly skim through and summarize it. And this is the sutta just prior to the one we are reading now. So Anguttara Nikaya 8.23, where the Buddha talks about Hatthaka. And the Buddha teaches the monks about Hatthaka of Āḻavī and says Hatthaka of Āḻavī has 7 amazing qualities. And then he lists the 7 qualities that we just mentioned and that we just went through. And then one of the bhikkhus, who's very inspired, goes to Hatthaka and tells Hatthaka, the Buddha just gave this teaching about you, and he said you have these amazing 7 qualities. And Hatthaka is a little bit embarrassed and says, oh, I hope that no other lay people were present. I hope that only monks and nuns heard this teaching. And the monk says, yeah, no lay people were present. Only the monks and nuns heard this teaching. And then Hatthaka says, oh, I'm very relieved. It's very good that lay people didn't hear about this, because he doesn't want to be put he doesn't want to be raised up above other people. He's quite content to just be unknown. So he is quite humble. And then the bhikkhu goes back to the Buddha and tells him of this encounter. And the Buddha says, well, in that case, we should add an 8th quality to Hatthaka's list. And the Buddha says, good, good. That clansman has few desires, since he does not want his inner wholesome qualities to be known by others. Therefore, bhikkhus, you should remember Hatthaka of Āḻavī as one who possesses this 8th astounding and amazing quality, that is fewness of desires. So that's how he got this 8th quality. And of course, the Buddha is teaching those 8 qualities so that we can emulate them and maybe know in which directions we should develop ourselves. And so this is the main sutta about Hatthaka, but there is one last one, which is also very short and also quite quirky and interesting. So we are going to read that one as well, since we have a little bit of time left. And this is also in the Anguttara Nikaya, the Book of Threes, and sutta number 127. So 3.127. And this one is also called Hatthaka. And in this sutta, the sutta goes as follows. On one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling at Savatthi in Jeta's Grove, Anathapindika's park. So now he's not in Āḻavī this time. Then when the night had advanced, the young Deva Hatthaka, illuminating the entire Jeta's Grove, approached the Blessed One. So here we have Hatthaka, who has just passed away as a human being, and he has been reborn as a Deva, and he's coming to visit the Buddha. Having approached, while thinking, I will stand in front of the Blessed One, he sank down, descended, and could not remain in place. Just as ghee or oil, when poured on sand, sinks down, descends, and does not remain in place, so the young Deva Hatthaka, while thinking, I will stand in front of the Blessed One, sank down, descended and could not remain in place. Then the Blessed One said to Hatthaka, "Create a gross body, Hatthaka." "Yes, Bhante," Hatthaka replied. Then he created a gross body, paid homage to the Buddha, to the Blessed One, and stood to one side. So here we have Hatthaka. He comes to see the Buddha. He wants to stand in front of the Buddha, but he is quite unskillful with his new body still. So instead of standing there, he just melts down into a puddle on the floor, basically. And so the Buddha has to instruct him and has to tell him how to manage this new body that he has, and tells him to assume a more grosser form of the body so that the body is more heavy and more stable and doesn't dissolve into a puddle on the floor. And Hatthaka does that and then is able to stand in front of the Buddha. And I think this little instance is also very cute, very quirky, obviously. But I think it's also very interesting because one of the things that we have noticed so far for the chief disciples is that they are always pairs. It's always two people for each category of bhikkhus, bhikkhunis, laymen, and laywomen. And so far, the pattern that we have seen is always the first of the two is always the one who is foremost in wisdom, and the second of the two is always the one foremost in psychic powers. So that was true for Sariputta and Mahamoggallana. That was true for Kema and Upalavanna. That was true for Kuch Uttara and Nandamata. And we again saw this for Chitta. That Chitta was Chitta, the householder. He was very wise, but he did not have any psychic powers. In fact, he was scared and very amazed by psychic powers. So we would assume that Hatthaka, if this pattern holds true, should be somebody who is very well acquainted with deep samadhi and psychic powers. But actually here, we see that the pattern is a little bit broken because Hatthaka doesn't have mastery over the subtle body. He is not very skillful at manipulating those subtle bodies. So it does seem that he wasn't too well acquainted with the psychic powers when he was a human being. So the pattern seems to be somewhat broken for the male lay disciples. So we have seen that it for all the other groups, but we don't really see it for the men here for some reason. So that's an interesting exception to the rule we have seen so far. And then the sutta continues. So Hatthaka stands in front of the Buddha, and the Blessed One said to him, "Hatthaka, do those teachings that you could recall in the past when you were a human being come back to you now? Bhante, those teachings that I could recall in the past when I was a human being come back to me now. And those teachings that I could not recall in the past when I was a human being also come back to me now. Just as the Blessed One is now hemmed in by bhikkhus, bhikkhunis, male and female lay followers, kings and royal ministers, sectarian teachers and their disciples, so I am hemmed in by other young devas. Young devas come to me even from a distance, thinking, we will hear the Dhamma from the young deva Hatthaka." So one thing we see here in this passage is that Hatthaka still has this quality of attracting a very large following. Devas come from far and near to be around him, and he says he is very crowded, just as the Buddha is very crowded by all these different kinds of people. Hatthaka is also very crowded by all the devas that come to him. So we see how tendencies carry on from life to life, and Hatthaka still has a personality that attracts a lot of people to him. And another thing that we can see here now much more clearly than in the sutta we read just now is that Hatthaka is very, very learned, and that he has memorized a very large number of teachings. So he is able to teach Dhamma to all these devas. Like, he has so much knowledge that all these devas are attracted to him and want to hear Dhamma from him. And his memory has even improved, so he can recall teachings that he couldn't really recall before. But he says even before, he could already recall quite a good number of teachings. So this is again something that was very, very important for the chief lay disciples, that they had such a profound knowledge of the suttas. and really something that is worth emulating. So learning, studying the suttas, and also memorizing the suttas is really a practice that is very, very helpful on the path. Even though we have books, it is still very helpful to memorize suttas. And then Hatthaka says, I died, Bhante, insatiable and unquenchable in 3 things. What 3? I died insatiable and unquenchable in seeing the Blessed One. I died insatiable and unquenchable in hearing the good Dhamma. I died insatiable and unquenchable in attending upon the Sangha. I died insatiable and unquenchable in these 3 things. So, usually the reason why we take rebirth is because we still have a lot of desires. If we had abandoned all our desires, all our delusions, all our hatred, all our ignorance, then we wouldn't be reborn. Then we would have attained arahantship, we wouldn't be reborn. So usually we think that if we still have desires at the point of death, that is not a good thing, because that will lead to rebirth. But here for Hatthaka did have desires at the time of death, but he had entirely wholesome desires. The only desires that were left for him was to attend on the triple gem, the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. So seeing the Buddha, hearing the Dhamma, and looking after the Sangha were the 3 desires that were not yet given up for Hatthaka when he passed away. So as far as desires go, I think these are pretty much the best desires that you can still have left. And so we see his devotion to the Triple Gem, and we see how deeply he was immersed in the Dhamma, that this was the only thing that was still left at the point of his death. And then he adds 2 stanzas at the end of this sutta, and he says, I could never get enough of seeing the Blessed One, hearing the good Dhamma, and attending on the Sangha. Training in the higher virtuous behavior, I rejoiced in hearing the good Dhamma. Hatthaka has gone to rebirth in Aviha, not having gotten enough of these 3 things. So here, this last stanza is also very interesting, because Hatthaka says that he has been reborn in Aviha. Aviha is one of the pure abodes. So this is a place where only non-returners can get reborn. And this again shows us or confirms to us that Hatthaka was very highly attained. He was a non-returner. And of course, as a chief lay disciple of the Buddha, he should be a non-returner. But the sutta so far haven't confirmed it, but now here finally we find a confirmation for that. So of course, as the chief disciples of the Buddha, the monastics should all be arahants and the lay people should all be non-returners. And so far we have kind of seen that confirmed. We have seen that confirmed in the text for Chitta, the householder, and for Nanda Mata. We kind of inferred it for Kuch Uttara. It wasn't expressly stated in the text because, as we mentioned, there isn't really a sutta about Kuch Uttara. And for Hatthaka, we also see it confirmed in the text now that he also was a non-returner. So he's not coming back to this world. He can still take several rebirths within the pure abodes, but he will attain arahantship there. And the pure abodes, obviously, this is a state of rebirth where only non-returners can be reborn. So no other being can enter into the pure abodes. And Hatthaka is guaranteed to attain arahantship there. So this is this third little sutta about Hatthaka. And so we have seen 3 suttas today. The first one was about how to sleep well, a very practical sutta. The second one was about how to make friendships. I think it's also a very practical sutta. And we saw the 8 qualities that we should emulate. And now the third one is Hatthaka telling us of his practice, his rebirth, and also his deep learning in the suttas and how he continues to teach devas in the place where he is staying. So I think it's also very beautiful that he still has the opportunity to share Dhamma in his new rebirth. And I think I will end here for today. If you have any questions, you can type them in the chat. And I just wanted to say that one thing I think that is very beautiful when we do these series of talks on, such as this one on the 4 chief lay disciples, is that it takes us to suttas that we would not normally pick for sutta study, because they're very short and they're kind of quirky, and they sort of talk about teachings that are somewhat not the most central teachings of Buddhism. But when we pick such topics as the chief lay disciple, they take us to such fairly obscure suttas. And I think we can also see how broad the Buddha's teaching is. And we can also see how much humor is there in the suttas, how quirky some of the suttas are. We can see some of the living conditions of the Buddha, as we saw when he was staying outdoors in the winter. Or here we can just some quirky little details, such as Hatthaka dissolving into a puddle on the floor and stuff like this. So I really enjoyed talking about the 4 chief lay disciples, because it does give us an opportunity to explore some of these lesser known suttas and have a look at teachings like these. So now if you have any questions, you can type them in the chat. So far, I don't see any questions. I see a lot of people have joined in. That's very nice. Let me see. Oh, there's so many comments. Oops. Yeah, I don't see any questions so far. Gita says, beautiful 8 qualities, Ayya, we must all strive to develop. Thank you. Yes, I agree. Other than that, I do not see any comment from the online audience. Does anybody of the live audience have any comments? No? Okay, in that case, I think we can end for today. Thank you all for joining in. I hope you enjoyed the 4 chief lay disciples. I hope you will all strive to emulate them and become like them. And so for now, we will end with 3 sadhus. Please join in if you like. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Have a good day and join in again this evening for Monk Chat with Ajahn Brahm.